Welcome to the Productivity Podcast. Delighted today to be joined by Gary Newbury, who's a retail supply chain expert. Senior exec on call, I think is the correct terminology, Gary.
Yep, that's right. That's what I'm doing in Canada.
And how are you? How's life?
Yeah, going swimmingly well. We'd like to have some of the loosening of restrictions that you've had in the UK recently. So looking forward to those days that we can get back to some form of normality.
Yeah, me too. I won't talk about the new normal because I think that's a historic saying now. It's just the normal, isn't it? But
Yes.
It's great to have you on and really appreciate your time. I know you've got a wealth of experience around kind of all things supply, e-commerce and all the bits that kind of centre that universe that makes sure that certainly in the retail world there's stock on the shelves for people to sell. Yeah. Before we get into the detail and have a conversation, let's find out a bit more about you. So can you give us a bit of a career history, Gary? Tell us about where you've worked, maybe how you landed in Toronto. It's not a very Canadian accent I'm picking up.
That's right. I'm very British. So, I started my career weirdly in the world of accounting and kind of transitioned finally into a situation where I was went up the pole in terms of accountancy. Then I did an MBA, and I came out of there and did a couple of operational turnarounds, and quite enjoyed the fun of that, because you were looking across functions as opposed to just in one isolated function itself. When I joined Storehouse Distribution, as it outsourced its logistics to Excel Logistics, but there were many other contractors involved in that, including Christian Sauerson and BRS, just to date me. And there was a switch in strategy, having decentralized everything and brought all the supply chain together. There was a change of heart at the center of the business, and they said, "Oh, we've got to decentralize the business and push the supply chain, or at least the logistics, back to each individual retail brand." And those brands included at the time British Home Stores, Mothercare, Habitat, and a whole range of other smaller banners. When I joined AH Distribution and helped grow the organisation from, in Canadian terms, $35 million to $350 million in 3 years. And for those people who sort of a trucking persuasion, it included Bayliss Distribution, Barnfather, and a few other bits and bobs that we acquired along the way, as well as growing the business. And then I did 18 years of independent work, working for a whole range of companies, including some very big names, Homebase, Sony, you name it. I've probably been in and around the logistics and supply chains of those operations. And then I moved to Canada and was overcome by how different the weather was, insofar as when it got to about April, the sun came on and it didn't stop. It was, as we know from England, that the sun comes on, you sort of rush around, grab ice cream, drink Coke, whatever, because the next day might be miserable and pretty plain. So I spent the first year not doing very much at all. But the second year I spent networking, and I found myself into a food service company for initially quite a small piece of work. It was to look at how do you get small deliveries off of the distribution fleet and put them onto a different format of vehicle, different operation. I thought that would take me 2 months, and the actual development of a concept didn't really take much more than 2 months, but they kept giving me more and more work. And 5 and a bit years later, I said that I think I need to get back into mainstream retailing, because there's a lot of work to do here in Canada, especially coming from the UK. They're in some ways very relaxed here, but they believe they're highly competitive, and that's the paradigm that they need to work through and try and get into a stage where they can make some big moves that will catch them up. Their e-commerce, for instance, up until pre-pandemic, was something like about 2.5 to 3.5% of total retail. I think the equivalent figure in the UK is somewhere between, 30 and 35. So it's a complete different scale. Some of the factors behind that are about, that relaxed attitude and not really wanting to invest in something with an unproven ROI. And the other one is the geography of Canada. I mean, if anybody grabs a map and said we've only got like 6 or 7 main centres in the second largest country in the world, quite a lot of it is, if you look on certain different maps, they've got quite a lot of literally white space that's covered by Arctic snow. But most of the activity is something like 90% of the people live within 200 miles of the US border. So it's and that strip lasts for about 3,000 miles across. So it's a pretty high logistical nightmare if you're trying to run, a sort of a situation which requires high density operations.
Amazing. Some brilliant experience there, Gary. Some names I'm sure people are familiar with, and anybody who's listening in the UK right now and it's quite cold and gloomy, I'm sure will be jealous of your climate and weather.
Oh, I don't know. It's -15 today. High of -15.
You're set up and you can take that, and you'll get the extremes of the hot weather the other way. If it was -15 here, I think we'd be in a self-inflicted lockdown because we couldn't travel. So anyway, so on to business. E-commerce you touched on, so I think that's a really good place to start. Certainly in the UK, as you said, the proportion of e-commerce, and if we include in that, all the click and collect going out and coming back, has grown significantly during the last 2 years. I think more from the pandemic than anything, but those levels are staying. And it's interesting because I was doing some store visits in the UK, couple of retailers over the last couple of weeks, and that there's a real dichotomy, I think, at the moment, because you've got retailers that have a good online platform. They'll generate lots of sales. They'll maybe have collect from store and return from store. But you've also got lots of retailers that are also seeing big growth in the likes of Uber Eats, Deliveroo, Just Eat for food product, but now also for vitamins, minerals, maybe medicines and all the other things. And my takeout from my visits were, and you may disagree or agree with this, the challenge is big and is getting bigger because as a retailer, I've historically maybe bolted on a cupboard or given some space in the warehouse for the stock to come in from that channel and the stock to go back. And that channel's grown massively and now causes me a real headache because I'd probably want to lay the store out completely differently to cater for it. And now I've got people coming in with Uber Eats bags, Just Eat bags to collect product as well on a short timeline to deliver out to customers, when actually we've kind of forgotten about the customer that's in the store or in the queue. And I'll take your thoughts on that and give you an example of something that I thought made my blood boil a little bit, I suppose, when I saw it.
Yeah. Well, it would be interesting to hear what you have to say about that. But I remember being on a podcast back in, it may have been 2019, towards the end of 2019, and it was designed to talk about systems and stuff about e-commerce. And actually, it was with Rethink Retail, sorry. And I actually changed the nature of the conversation. And we talked about Target, because Target's often seen as one of the legacy retailers who's done a really good job of embracing both store traffic and e-commerce traffic together. But I said most of the press cuttings I get when I read them, I think, right, we're doing a great job. Certainly at that time they were. But one thing I couldn't get my mind around, we both sort of got an aspect of warehousing in our background. Why would you pick from a store and not, and on top of that, when you've got a team of Target pickers, selection guys going in to pick all these orders that have just come in, you're sort of barging past the customer. You're now competing for the same goods on the shelf as the customer is. And as we go into peak, the team gets bigger. They push harder to get the customers that way. As the customers, they're coming at a great rate of knots. They want to secure their stock for for Christmas breaks and stuff like that. So I've always been an advocate of actually finding a way of not doing it in the store. And the development of micro fulfillment centers is a good step towards a different type of solution. It gives you so many other benefits, such as stock accuracy. So I'd be interested to hear what made your blood boil.
What made my blood? So I saw this twice on the same day, and I've seen it countless times since. And maybe now it's because I'm aware of it that I'm seeing it. rather than it's new. But I'll tell you the story. So, visiting retailer X in the store, 5 or 6 customers in the queue, and this is a retailer that sells. It's not a McDonald's type retailer, but a fast foodish retailer, let's say. And customers queuing, ordering. Guy walks in with a Just Eat bag, walks straight to the front, picks up his order. Colleague stops serving the customers in the queue, serves the guy with a Just Eat. Guy goes out. Serves the next customer. Another guy walks in with a Just Eat bag, stops serving the people in the queue, serves the guy with a Just Eat bag, walks out, starts serving. Now the queue's 10 or 11 people. And this just happens, carries on, Just Eat, Uber Eats, Deliveroo, and every time they come in, the customer in the queue, the physical one in front of them, gets parked and stopped and forgotten, and they service the delivery partner. So I kind of thought I get some of that because they're on a service level agreement to fulfill that order in X minutes, and it's this, that, and the other. But almost a physical customer in the store became invisible in those moments of time. Yeah. So I thought there might just be the policy in that one store. Move on. Not a great experience, but is what it is. Went to another store. Exactly the same thing happened. And I'm then starting to think this is a symptom of the fact that the store's not set up to deliver that capacity, those different channels in a way which makes both customers feel important. It feels like they're almost making a choice of this one's more important as soon as they go in, even though I'm stood there looking you in the eye saying, can I have 2 of these, please? It was a really bizarre thing and replicated, as I say, in a different brand, in a different store pretty much instantly.
Yeah, and I think that if we just take that back to bricks and mortar kind of retail rather than food service, I think there's some strong parallels there as well, because if I want to secure my stock, I've learned that I can do it by e-commerce, and I can just drive up to the store and there's a lot of machinations and some guy, and I'm talking about that in a generic sense, grabs my stuff and brings it out, runs out hurriedly to my vehicle. The boot goes up, puts the stuff in, boot goes down. On your way, sir. That same person could have been serving a customer in the store. So there is this sort of strange, I wouldn't say, intermediary world that we're going through. Before the pandemic, certainly over here in Canada, where e-commerce wasn't a big feature, it was the store traffic, and that was the attention of stores. But now we've got click and collect or Boppis or whatever you like to call it, where the same format of store, the same organisation of store is actually servicing 2 channels, and I would argue perhaps not doing it particularly well. And I think many of us would say is go in place, if you're an executive in one of these organizations, no matter how well you think you're designing your process, sitting in the C-suite, the boardroom, wherever it might be, and issuing missives by email, communication means, actually go onto your website, order something, and just follow it all the way through and see who you meet along that way, and see what put yourself in the shoes of a customer. What would their experience really be? Not your designed experience, but your actual experience. And then do a compare and contrast and work out what you need to do in your store, in your food service outlet, whatever it might be, to try and bring your thoughts into line with reality, or bring reality closer to where you want it to be. But that often requires quite a lot of process re-engineering, maybe infrastructural changes, but certainly a lot of training with the people who are delivering these potentially 2 channels of operations.
Yeah, and back to your kind of micro fulfillment center example, it's interesting, isn't it, that for those organizations that pick from store, if you think about that journey that you've described in terms of following, the stock will turn up, somebody will replenish it to the shelf, so we've touched it once.
Yeah.
Then, dependent on when your pickers pick, a picker might pick it, so that organization's touched it twice. They'll probably tidy up as they pick it, so you've maybe touched other product. You may pick it and leave it out of stock. So again, the customer that's walking in the store is faced with the out of stock, and the customer that's ordered through the online channel has had it picked.
Yes.
So it's this cyclical I suppose, order of priorities or order of process, which potentially could mean that the physical customer has less chance of buying that product than the virtual customer.
Yeah. And this has been the little, I want to say, whiz that e-commerce has become more attractive, not because of the convenience of it, because many people portray it as, the convenience of e-commerce. Actually, it's a way of me, especially during these times of all this disruption, particularly around the supply chain and surety of, product being where I want it. If I order it online and it commits to me and it takes my money, all now I have to do is either wait for it to turn up if it's a home delivery, or go to the store and pick it up without all the hassle of wondering, will I have it or not? Or will I have to make a substitution in real time if I'm a physical customer?
It's interesting. Some of it comes back to kind of business models, didn't it? And I know we talked offline about kind of high stock term models that need some form of improvement in terms of all the tasks that are being challenged in store now. I know, like us, you see lots of people using the kind of lean banner as a way of tackling projects or business models or stripping out process. Is that a good approach, do you think, in terms of looking at this whole e-commerce problem, is using that kind of lens without it becoming a big cost-cutting exercise?
I think that there's a lot of stuff in there that you've sort of tabled because there are perhaps two models of how e-commerce operates. One is you take the stock, the majority of the stock for both the store and the e-commerce channel, to the closest place to the customer, which is typically the store, and then you are able to fulfill store orders or e-commerce orders from that locality. Or alternatively, you have a situation where you say, okay, the stock comes into the main warehouse and it's split at that point. So if a customer wants to click and collect, we actually pick it in the warehouse and find some way of sending it to the store or to the home address, all the way from a warehouse, which is often nowhere near where the customer lives. So each one of those has some pluses and minuses. I quite like the idea that the potential e-commerce stock goes with the big truck, goes to the store and gets handled into singles in the normal way. The MFC might sit in the way of that, in terms of, like, you have to decant it into singles to put it into a micro fulfillment center, and the decision then becomes, do you put everything in the micro fulfillment center and then feed out once a day a replenishment run across the whole store, or do you have some other policy working there? The thing about lean is there's some basic principles in lean, and they're not always well understood, but lean is a term that's often used to describe, how would I say, a pretty ill-conceived approach to helping a business to have a sustainable line of profitability. So in the real lean world, if we look at, an archetypal company like Toyota, and we try and draw something from that and then start to think about it within the context of e-commerce, Toyota's worked out over 75, 80 years that I respond to demand. So I don't make anything until I'm very close to the actual demand signal. And as a result of that, I need to have my manufacturing capacities around me, very close to hand, and we work together to see how this demand is developing. Then I can actually make a batch of one, and I can actually pass that through my system and satisfy the customer within, depending on how, what model you have, how much variation you have on that. But basically, if I go into a dealer, I say I want a Toyota Corolla, they'll probably give you, we'll have it with you in a week. What colour, what seat trim, etc., etc. But that's only possible when your production capacity is literally around your assembly factory, and you're responding to demand, and you've worked out all the tools and techniques that are required to be able to do a batch of one. What we have in the retail world is we have forecasts. We have forecasts going out maybe 9 months, a year, maybe 2 or 3 seasons in that. And we break down that demand into sort of weekly orders, and we send that from Canada across to to China or Vietnam or somewhere in the Far East, and they make up containers worth and they put it onto a boat and it brings it over here, the customer doesn't feature into this. And the time phasing of or temporal disposition of this, the customer does not feature in this equation whatsoever. So we're guessing that the customer will want the stuff we've ordered for them 6 months ago, 9 months ago. It will arrive, we're putting it in a distribution centre, we push it out to stores. There's no pull in here, everything's a push. And we're conduct digital marketing campaigns, we do ads on telly, digital spend, whatever it is, to try and persuade the customer this is what you need. It seems a bit, I would say, counterintuitive that would deliver a superior result to somebody who was driven by demand. So in e-commerce, we like in the retail setting, we are trapped in that same world. But the difficulty with e-commerce is we're talking about singles, we're talking about randomized demand, and the only way we can try and control that demand is by running quite aggressive digital marketing efforts, television, whatever it might be, to try and control or try to manage the availability of our product and the appetite of customers to come and want that product. So it's, as a result of that, what we have, and for a long time we've had in retail, is this idea or this notion that if we can just improve our stock turns, everything's great in the garden. That if we reduce our effectively investment in inventory, and we're faced with broadly constant sales, our return on capital employed around inventory, or GMROI is the internal phrase, can look good as long as we get our sell-through right. But what happens there is what I see that's happened there is that companies have sometimes slashed inventory to try and force the number to look like they're in control. And that's a rather dangerous thing, because when companies like Toyota have reduced inventory, there's often an infrastructure around them, and there's a commitment to, within their teams, commitment to understand the impacts of that in real time and to act on those impacts so that they don't damage the flow of the business and the service to the customer. Whereas an accountant or even an operating manager saying, let's slash off $10,000 worth of stock this week because our sales are a bit low, so we've got to make the figure look good. So let's not order some stuff, or let's put it on promotion, or whatever it might do to accelerate sales or reduce stock, just to get to a number, rather than think about the whole process, about what its purpose is designed to do. And then if we find that inventory is too high, we start to reduce that, but we have everybody engaged in that process, and everybody's looking for adverse impact and then acting on those adverse impacts, so we can lower the stock levels with some comfort and confidence. And I don't think that's not in retail thinking. It's just cut the stock and get the number right, and that's an unfortunate thing.
Yeah, and we see lots of retailers that will maybe hold more lines but less stock, so they increase the range in effect but hold less lines, which then ultimately means that you need to deliver more. So it becomes self-fulfilling to some degree, of more line, more range, more deliveries, therefore there's more trunking that goes on, there's more handling of the stock that goes on, there's more counting of the stock that goes on, there's more pricing of the stock that goes on, but they feel comforted by the fact now they sell 50,000 lines instead of 20,000 lines.
Yeah. And that's the dilemma of retailing, is that what we've learned over a long period of time is that when we start a banner, a brand, we go to market and we get some success. We think, I'll tell you what, let's put some more stores up there. Okay, let's build another 10 stores, and we're still making some success. But suddenly the sales aren't really, you get into that point of diminishing returns. So I tell you what, let's make some bigger stores. Right, now we've got some bigger stores, let's throw more stuff in them. And there's a point where you, even with that model, you get to a sense of diminishing returns. So you've actually hit the sort of, I won't say the limit of the market. You've plateaued. Let's hope you've been in maturation. You haven't already gone in decline. So if you've got static sales, the only thing you can focus on to improve your profitability is your costs. So then you start to look at the basic costs of retail are, primarily merchandise and the labour. So the first thing you can do very easily is just to slash the floor staff. So you look at their hours, you take out heads, whatever. Then you start looking at the merchandise and go, well, where can I find this like a lot cheaper? So that was behind the driver for moving to sourcing in the Far East, because it is relatively a lot cheap, not just marginally cheaper, a lot cheaper at the time in the 1980s, 1990s, and certainly early 2000s. But the trouble is, we've lost a sense of purpose. Our brand started serving a discrete market segment with a certain type of problem solution. But in our distraction to go after sales, we just added in more categories and whatever. And we're doing this, in essence, on marketplaces now. We did that in stores. Now we're doing it on marketplaces. So we're adding more and more categories, more and more stuff on the marketplace to try to boost sales. But I think that, for any retailer having emerged from this pandemic in some shape, I think that they need to revisit the purpose that they existed in the first place. That may have changed slightly because consumers over the last 2 years have changed their aspirations and their appetite for things. But they need to retune into that and actually look around and go, do you know what? We need to get rid of some of these categories because there's people who can do these better. We're not making the margins on these that we would like to make. And we just focus on a relatively smaller range assortment that actually meets our customers' requirements, and we can actually then start to get, in some ways, if we become very good at it, we can actually start to get ahead of the consumer and help them down a path that they come to us more regularly, because we're offering not only just a solution, we're delighting them with that solution, rather than saying, hey, come to us, we sell pretty much everything. We're a Walmart, we're in local speak, we're a Canadian Tire kind of thing.
And that comes back, interestingly, kind of brings us full circle almost, of we're seeing, certainly in the UK and Europe, lots more collaboration. So people deciding, and a good example is, I suppose, some of the bigger supermarkets in the UK historically have all had coffee shops or cafes. Most of them now have outsourced that to Costa or Starbucks or a specialist coffee chain, because they've realised that it's very costly for them to do it. They don't do it as well, and they've not got the pull. Actually, make a bit of money off the space, but have the experts do it. Therefore, they can free up that team's time and resource and the central team to focus on being really good at being a core supermarket and delivering that purpose and those values. Do you think that trend is going to carry on as people come back around that circle that you described of being really good at what their purpose should deliver, which may mean that they have to partner with experts in other areas to build a better overall proposition?
Yeah, I think I would argue it's inevitable, because there'll be a point. I think we've been through various points of diminishing returns, and we have tried to bolt things on to try and bolster ourselves and bolster our or avoid that, on the retail concept life cycle, which looks like a product life cycle, as we start to look at decline in terms of revenue and profitability, we don't want to do the hard work of reinvention. So all we do is add a few more categories in, hope that buys us another, few quarters or a year before, maybe we've moved on or something else has happened in the marketplace. So I think, the collaborations you talk of are I've certainly experienced those in the UK with, certainly Costa was in my local Tesco's. And I think that that must be the model that many retailers need to look at if they want to say, if you understand your purpose and you start to rein in your categories, your assortment to be very specific about what that purpose is, but you think it would actually be great to bring more traffic in and have a small restaurant, a small coffee shop, or a dry cleaner, or whatever it might be, that would connect with our customer in a much more meaningful way on top of what we're doing, then it would be natural to do that. But where I'd be coming from as well, one of the things that I are desperate to see it changing, and I had this conversation very recently on one of my podcasts, is that we've been through this, we're still working through this pandemic, and I've been advocating for quite some time that what we need to do is go towards smaller format stores. So, sort of 1,000, 2,000, up to 5,000 square foot stores, less aisles. And in fact, it's more about the brand than buying. So you go into the store and you experience a brand, and the brand's all about the people on the retail side are trying to help you understand the brand more clearly, helping you to order some stuff or buy some stuff and have it delivered to home, or click and collect, or whatever it might be. So it's not those aisles and aisles and aisles of product where you have to wander around and figure out where each one is. And, certainly in my experience at Tesco's before I left the UK, was they kept changing a few things around, and that was meant to create interest and excitement. It did nothing else than cause massive frustration and make me wonder, should I be shopping here? Should I nip down the road and go to Sainsbury's, who are probably involved in another version of that? So I think that we're going to see a more, if we think about the digital natives, when they decide that the best way for us to improve our sales is to actually go to stores, they tend to have smaller stores, the 1,000, 2,000 square foot kind of format, and it is very experiential versus buying stuff. They don't immediately go to the rows and rows of aisles and product. They think about, what do we want to say to our customer about us? What do we want the customer to learn about us? And how do we want the customer to engage and be loyal with us? So I think that for the larger format stores, there will be collaborations. But for brands who have really got that focus on purpose, they may actually go to a much smaller format store, which would, in some ways, not allow them to do too much collaboration because there won't be the space to do it.
Yeah, and maybe someone like Apple's heading that way or leading that way from what you've described, the experiential piece. The product is, I won't say the product is clearly central for them, but it's not the obvious thing when you go into the store. It's the aesthetics, it's the feel. An Apple store is pretty much in a cool location, looks cool, the people in there are pretty cool, and all experts, I think they call them Apple geniuses, are they, in the product. You can go and learn, you can go and chill out, you can play with the product. And ultimately, they want you to buy into the brand, because once you buy the watch, you'll buy the phone. Once you buy the phone, you'll buy the iPad. So it's a jump in at any point on this loop, because once you're in, it's kind of difficult to move back to Android or Samsung or a different kind of operating system.
Yes.
Gary, it's been a pleasure to catch up. A couple of things from me. Final question that everybody gets on the podcast is, what's the best bit of business advice you've ever been given?
Well, I think I've been given lots along the way, and I've also, through working with lots of different organisations, learned a lot. But I think the one for me that's really stuck in my mind for the last couple of years is there's a guy called George Menakakis, who I've met here in Canada, and he's written a few books. And the last but one book he wrote was, I think it was a great transition or something. And he wrote it about, I think, was it 3 or 4 years ago, I think, and sneaked into one of the chapters, and he sort of shrugged his shoulders when I talked to him about it. Said lots of other things, was this statement, and it was like a gleaming light, and it said, for those companies who keep, particularly retail, keep saying, well, what's Amazon doing? What's what Amazon doing? We need to do more of what Amazon's doing. Or, latterly it might even be, if you're south of border, what Target are doing, or even what Walmart might be doing. But he said, competitors are not the enemy. The inability to create trends is. And I think that this is a really powerful, profound statement. It's almost up there with, in my mind, with some of the things that Deming came out with, in the sense of, if we can't understand our purpose and take our customers on a journey where we're actually getting ourselves into some kind of blue ocean situation, then of course we're going to be obsessed with what the competitor's doing, because we're just following, and as a result of following, we'll have lower margins, we'll be on the periphery of things, we'll have no loyalty, and in terms of forward development path, we just wait for somebody else to do something, then we'll study that, reverse engineer it, and try and do it in our store network, whatever format we're in. So I think that's a really, for anybody listening to this part of the podcast, I think I just challenge them and just say, are you setting trends in your business for your customers? Are you taking them on a journey, or are you just watching? If you're a retailer, you're just watching Amazon. What are they up to? They're doing drones, airship warehouses. Oh, better do some of that. No, stop following everybody else. Know your stuff and get in front of your customers.
No, I love that one. That's one of the best ones we've had, Gary. And absolutely agree. If you're sat watching, then to some degree you're moving backwards while everybody else is moving forwards and making the gap bigger. It's certainly, we know in retail you've got to be at the forefront, otherwise you just don't survive these days.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So if people want to find out more about you, Gary, listen to your podcast, where's the best place for them to reach out and do that?
They can go on to YouTube, Retail Aid. It's all one string, Retail AID, or find me on LinkedIn, or find me on Retail Aid at LinkedIn. And I've got my own website, retailaid.ca. Very parochial.
Yep.
So there's bags of information and resources out there. The YouTube channel's slowly getting in popularity. I have some excellent guests on there. There's some people you might even bump into: Card Bate, Jeff Roberts, who's in London,
yep.
Simeon Sigel, who's a equity analyst who loves retail, and I think on Friday we also had Rosalind Greiner in there, and we were talking about this very subject. We sparked from a conversation with Britton Ladd, who said, given what Macy's are doing, we're trying to split up their e-commerce, and Saks have done, splitting up their e-commerce from a stores business. Why don't we just do it for the whole of advocating? Why don't we do it for the whole of retailing? And we sort of explored all the ins and outs of that. So that podcast will be coming out pretty soon.
Brilliant. We'll put some links in the show notes so people can find it. Gary, once again, absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming on and appreciate your time.
Okay, thanks very much, Simon, and good luck with your situation in the UK, and hope Canada can catch up with you soon.
Thanks.